Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The signal came from a star system that shouldn't exist. Commander Jakara of the Celestial Dominion had been monitoring the void between spiral arms for 300 cycles, and in all that time, the scanners had detected nothing but cosmic dust and the occasional rogue asteroid. The region known as the Silence was aptly named, a dead zone where no civilization dared to venture, where even the bravest explorers had vanished without trace. It was a place of legends and warnings, whispered about in the academies as a reminder of the universe's infinite capacity for mystery and danger. But now, cutting through that eternal quiet like a blade through silk, came a transmission. Jakara's sensory stalks trembled as the data scrolled across the holographic display in her command chamber. The signal was strong, impossibly strong for something originating from the Silence. It pulsed with a regularity that could only be artificial, could only be intelligent. Her second-in-command, a heavily armored Kryn named Torvus, leaned forward, his 6 eyes widening in disbelief. "Commander, this cannot be accurate," Torvus rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "The Silence has been mapped and remapped for millennia. There are no habitable systems. There is no life." Jakara's manipulator tendrils danced across the controls, running diagnostics, checking for equipment failure, for cosmic interference, for any rational explanation. But the numbers didn't lie. The signal was real. And more than that, it was a distress call. "Analyze the transmission pattern," she commanded, her voice steady despite the cold dread pooling in her core. "I want to know what we're dealing with." The ship's artificial intelligence, a quantum consciousness named Oryx, responded immediately. Its voice echoed through the chamber with an unsettling calm. "Signal analyzed. The pattern is unknown. It does not match any registered civilization in the galactic archive. The mathematical encoding suggests a Level 3 technological society at minimum, possibly Level 4, a Level 4 civilization. The Celestial Dominion itself had only achieved Level 5 status after 10,000 years of advancement. A Level 4 society emerging from the Silence was impossible. It defied everything they knew about galactic development, about the careful progression from primitive to enlightened that all species followed. "What are they saying?" Jakara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. There was a pause, unusual for Oryx, whose processing speed was nearly instantaneous. When it spoke again, there was something different in its tone, something that might have been concern. "The message is fragmentary. Much of it is corrupted, but I have isolated several phrases. Translating now." The chamber fell silent except for the ambient hum of the ship's systems. Then through the speakers came a voice. It was rendered in standard galactic common, but beneath the translation, Jakara could hear the original, harsh guttural sounds that sent shivers through her neural pathways. "Containment has failed. Losses are catastrophic to anyone receiving this transmission. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. They cannot be stopped. We tried. God help us, we tried." The message dissolved into static, then silence. Torvus's armored plates rattled, a sign of deep unease among his species. "Commander, we should report this to the Council immediately. Whatever is happening in the Silence is not our concern. Let the military fleets investigate." Jakara knew he was right. Protocol demanded she relay the information to High Command and await orders. But something about that voice, that desperate human voice, because what else could make those sounds, called to something primal in her consciousness. "Set a course for the source of the transmission," she said quietly. "Commander." "That's an order." "Torvus." The journey into the Silence took them 3 days at maximum acceleration. With each passing hour, the background radiation of the normal galaxy faded, replaced by an emptiness so profound it seemed to press against the hull like a physical weight. Jakara spent most of that time in her quarters, studying everything the archives contained about the region. The Silence had been explored only once, 12,000 years ago, by the ancient Velkari Empire. The expedition had consisted of 20 ships and the finest scientific minds of that age. Only one vessel had returned, its crew dead at their stations, their bodies withered and desiccated as if their very life force had been drained away. The ship's logs were corrupted beyond recovery, but the few fragments that remained spoke of something waiting in the darkness, something that sang with a voice that unmade reality itself. After that, the silence had been declared forbidden territory. The Galactic Council had placed warning beacons around its perimeter and forbidden all travel into the region. Over the millennia, the warnings had become legends and the legends had become myths. Most modern species dismissed the old stories as superstition, the paranoid fantasies of a less enlightened age. But Jakara remembered her grandmother's words, spoken when she was just a juvenile. The universe is older than we know, child, and it holds secrets that were never meant for mortal comprehension. Respect the boundaries or pay the price. On the third day they found the planet. It hung in space like a wound, a terrestrial world that blazed with the light of millions of fires. As they approached, Jakara's horror grew. Entire continents were burning. The oceans were choked with ash. And in orbit, drifting like the corpses of metal giants, were the remains of a fleet. Oryx identification, she breathed, scanning. The vessels are of unknown configuration, but their technological sophistication suggests the species designation human, cross-referencing with historical data. Match confirmed. These are human ships. Commander, according to our records, humanity is a pre-contact species from Sector 447, over 3,000 light-years from this location. They achieved spaceflight approximately 300 cycles ago, but have never ventured beyond their home system. Torvus turned to face her, his massive frame rigid with tension. Then how in the name of the first light did they get here? And what did this to them? As if in answer, the sensors screamed a warning. Something was approaching from the planet's surface. Multiple somethings, the tactical display filled with contacts, hundreds of them, rising from the burning world like a swarm of insects. But these were no insects. Even at this distance, the sensors could resolve their shapes. Organic, writhing forms that defied conventional physics, that seemed to shift and blur at the edges of perception. Evasive action, Jakara commanded, but it was too late. The first creature struck the ship's shields with the force of a kinetic weapon. Alarms blared as the defensive system struggled to compensate. Then came another impact and suddenly they were surrounded. Through the viewport, Jakara caught glimpses of nightmares-made flesh, entities with too many limbs, too many mouths, bodies that twisted through dimensions that shouldn't exist, shields at 40%. The tactical officer shouted, "We cannot sustain this assault." Jakara's mind raced. They had to escape, had to warn the Dominion about what lurked in the silence. She was about to give the order to retreat when a new contact appeared on the sensors. A single ship emerging from behind the planet's largest moon. It was human in design, but barely recognizable. The hull was scorched and pitted, sections of it torn away to expose the interior structures. It should have been a dead hulk, but somehow it was moving. Its engines burning with a fierce, defiant light, and it was heading straight for them. "Incoming transmission," Oryx announced. The view screen flickered to life, and Jakara found herself looking at a human for the first time. The creature was bipedal, its face covered in scars and burns, its eyes, those strange forward-facing eyes, blazing with something that might have been madness or might have been resolve. When it spoke, its voice was raw, damaged, but carried an authority that transcended species. "Dominion vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the UESC Prometheus. Break orbit immediately. We'll cover your retreat." "Captain Chen," Jakara replied, struggling to keep her voice level, "your ship is heavily damaged." "You cannot possibly—" "I said we'll cover your retreat." The human's voice cracked like a whip. "My crew didn't survive 3 months of hell just to watch another species get torn apart. Now move." What would you do in that moment? Would you accept the sacrifice of strangers, of a species you'd never met, to save your own crew? Or would you stand and fight beside them, knowing it might mean your death? Jakara made her choice in an instant. Tactical, target those creatures. All weapons full spread. Torvus, reroute all available power to shields and engines. We are not leaving anyone behind. The human on the screen blinked, surprise flickering across those alien features. Then something like a smile, a predator's smile, crossed her face. Well, all right then. Welcome to the party. Prometheus out. The battle that followed would be recorded in Dominion archives as the Battle of the Burning World, though few who read the reports would truly understand what happened in those desperate minutes. Jakara's ship, the Eternal Vigil, was a science vessel, not a warship, but it carried defensive armaments that could hold off raiders and pirates. Against conventional threats, those weapons were formidable. Against the entities swarming from the planet, they were barely adequate. Plasma bolts carved through the void, and some of the creatures disintegrated in bursts of incandescent energy. But for every one destroyed, two more took its place. They moved with hideous coordination, their forms rippling and changing, adapting to each new weapon used against them. And all the while that sound, that awful singing that the ancient Velkari had spoken of, grew louder, pressing against Jakara's consciousness like thorns. But the Prometheus fought like nothing she had ever seen. The human ship was barely holding together, its hull breached in a dozen places, life support failing, yet it attacked with a ferocity that bordered on suicidal. Its weapons were primitive compared to Dominion technology, simple projectile cannons and crude missiles, but the humans used them with devastating effectiveness. They didn't try to match the creature's impossible movements. Instead, they predicted, anticipated, creating kill zones and channeling the swarm into overlapping fields of fire. "They're herding them," Torvus said, awe creeping into his voice. "By the ancestors, they're turning the creature's own aggression against them." Jakara watched the tactical display, watched as the Prometheus executed maneuvers that should have torn the damaged ship apart, and understood. These humans weren't just fighting. They were fighting smart. They had learned something during their months of horror, had adapted and overcome in ways that spoke to an incredible mental flexibility. The Celestial Dominion was the pinnacle of galactic civilization, a society of philosophers and scientists who had transcended war millennia ago. They solved problems through meditation and reason, through careful study and measured response. It had made them wise, but it had also made them soft. These humans, these supposedly primitive creatures, knew nothing of meditation or philosophy. They knew only survival, and they were very, very good at it. "Commander, the creatures are changing tactics," Oryx reported. "They're concentrating their assault on the Prometheus. I believe they recognize it as the greater threat." Jakara's heart clenched as she watched the swarm converge on the human ship. The Prometheus was already dying. Another few hits would destroy it completely. "All weapons, focus fire on that concentration," she ordered. "We need to draw them away from—" "Belay that order, Vigil." Captain Chen's voice cut through the channel, and now the human looked directly at the camera, directly at Jakara. "You've got a clear run to the jump point. Take it. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them about the Whispers." "The Whispers? That's what we call them, because that's what they do. They whisper to you in your mind, showing you things, promising you things. Some of my crew listened. That's how it started." Chen's jaw tightened. "Don't let anyone else make our mistake. Now go." The Prometheus suddenly accelerated, ramming directly into the thickest part of the swarm. The creatures swarmed over the hull like ants, their forms merging and flowing. Jakara realized with horror what the human captain intended. "She's going to self-destruct," Torvus whispered, but Chen wasn't done yet. Through the static-filled connection, Jakara heard the human captain speaking, not to her but to her own crew. "All hands, this is Captain Chen. It's been an honor serving with you. Remember the oath we took. To explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations. Well, we found one hell of a civilization out here." A grim laugh. "And we're going to make sure they live to tell the story. Reactor overload in 30 seconds. For Earth, for humanity. For everyone we lost." The channel went silent. "Maximum acceleration," Jakara commanded, her voice breaking. "Get us out of here." The Eternal Vigil's engines roared to life, pushing the ship away from the planet, away from the swarm, away from the burning tomb of human ambition. Behind them, the Prometheus's reactor reached critical mass. The explosion was visible even from orbit, a miniature sun that bloomed in the darkness and consumed everything within 1,000 kilometers. The Whispers caught in the blast radius simply ceased to exist, their impossible forms unable to withstand the fury of human engineering at its most destructive. But the light of that explosion illuminated something else, something that made Jakara's blood freeze in her veins. On the planet's surface, writhing across entire continents, was a shape so vast it could only be perceived from space. It was the source of the Whispers, the thing they had emerged from, and it was aware of them. She could feel its attention like a weight on her soul, could feel it reaching out across the void with appendages that existed in more than 3 dimensions. Then they jumped, and the silence fell away behind them. The journey back to Dominion space took a week of silence, of processing what they had witnessed, of trying to comprehend the implications. Jakara spent hours reviewing the sensor logs, studying the recordings of the battle, listening again and again to Captain Chen's final transmission. When they finally reached the nearest Dominion outpost, she submitted a full report to the Council. She expected disbelief, expected skepticism, expected to be questioned and doubted. Instead, the response came with shocking speed. A High Council priority transmission, requesting her presence at the capital. The Grand Hall of the Celestial Dominion was a structure built over the course of centuries, a soaring cathedral of thought and reason, where the greatest minds of dozens of species gathered to guide galactic civilization. Jakara had never been summoned here before. She stood before the Council, before beings who had lived for thousands of years and witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and told them everything. When she finished, silence filled the hall. It was High Counselor Vereth, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, who finally spoke. "We have received confirmation of your report," Vereth said, and the words sent shockwaves through the chamber. 12 hours ago, we detected a massive surge of quantum disturbance from the silence. Every beacon we placed around the region was destroyed simultaneously. Whatever exists in that place has awakened fully. Another counselor, this one a methane breather from the outer systems, added, "We've also detected something else. Jump signatures, hundreds of them, originating from the edges of the silence and moving outward into the galaxy. The whispers are spreading." Panic rippled through the assembled delegates. Species who had lived in peace for millennia suddenly faced an existential threat they couldn't understand or predict. But Jakara felt something different rising in her chest, a strange, fierce determination that she recognized from her time watching the humans fight. "High Council," she said, her voice cutting through the growing chaos, "I request permission to lead an expedition to human space. In Sector 447, we need to find out more about this species, about how they survived as long as they did against the Whispers. They have something we lack, experience with this enemy. The humans you encountered are dead, Commander," Vereth pointed out gently. "What makes you think others of their kind will be willing to help us?" Jakara thought of Captain Chen's face, of that predator's smile, of the way the Prometheus had fought to its last breath to save strangers from a species they'd never met. "Because that's what they do," she said simply. "They help." The Council debated for hours, but eventually they granted her request. 3 days later, Jakara found herself aboard a diplomatic vessel heading toward Sector 447, toward Earth, toward the home of a species that had inadvertently held back an existential threat long enough for the rest of the galaxy to receive a warning. What they found there would change everything. Earth hung in space like a blue jewel, beautiful and fragile and utterly unaware of what was coming. The Dominion vessel approached cautiously, broadcasting friendship and peace on every channel. At first, there was no response. Then suddenly, the ship was surrounded by human vessels, primitive things held together with welds and rivets, but bristling with weapons. "Unknown vessel. This is Earth Defense Command," came a crisp, no-nonsense voice. "You are in restricted space. State your intentions immediately or be destroyed." Jakara's translator worked overtime to convert her words into the harsh sounds of human language. "Earth Defense Command. I am Commander Jakara of the Celestial Dominion. We come in peace. We have information about one of your vessels, the UESC Prometheus and its crew." There was a long pause. When the voice returned, it had changed, grown softer, more cautious. "Stand by for docking clearance. You will be met by military escort. Any aggressive action will result in immediate termination." "Understood?" "Understood." The orbital station they docked with was utilitarian to the point of brutality. No aesthetic considerations, no artistic flourishes, just function and efficiency. The humans who met them were similarly practical, dressed in military uniforms and carrying weapons that, while primitive, were clearly maintained with meticulous care. The leader of the group was an older human male with silver in his hair and more medals on his chest than Jakara had seen on any Dominion admiral. He studied her with those unnerving forward-facing eyes, and she saw intelligence there and pain, and a weariness that spoke of too many losses. "I'm General James Marcus," he said bluntly. "You mentioned the Prometheus. That ship and her crew were listed as lost 9 months ago during a long-range exploration mission. Do you have information about their fate?" "General Marcus, perhaps we should speak somewhere more private," Jakara suggested, glancing at the assembled soldiers. The general's jaw tightened. "These people have earned the right to hear whatever you have to say. The Prometheus was their sister ship. Many of them had friends, family aboard. So tell me, Commander, are they dead?" Jakara thought of Captain Chen's final moments, of the Prometheus burning like a star in the darkness. "They died heroes, General. They saved my crew and quite possibly the entire Celestial Dominion. But I need to tell you the full story, and you need to hear what's coming." They convened in a conference room that was painfully bright by Jakara's standards, with harsh white lights that made her sensory stalks ache. But she endured it and told them everything, about the silence, about the whispers, about the battle and the sacrifice. When she finished, the humans sat in stunned silence. It was General Marcus who spoke first. "You're telling me there's an entity out there that can turn entire planets into, what, feeding grounds? And it's spreading across the galaxy." "Yes, and the Prometheus held it off for 3 months. Captain Chen indicated they had been fighting the Whispers since they first arrived in the region. Based on her logs and our analysis, your crew learned to resist the creature's mental attacks through a combination of mental discipline and strategic retreat. They developed tactics that effectively countered the swarm behavior. General, your people did something unprecedented. They adapted to fight an enemy that exists partially outside normal space-time. Another human, a woman with dark skin and the insignia of a scientist, leaned forward. How? How did they resist mental attacks from entities that can literally reshape reality? Jakara pulled up the data she had compiled. "We believe it's related to human neural architecture. Your brains are stubborn. That's the best word I can use. Where most species would be overwhelmed by the contradictory sensory input the Whispers generate, human minds seem capable of, I think you would say, shutting down the affected areas and operating on reduced capacity. It's not elegant, but it's effective. We call it compartmentalization," General Marcus said quietly. "It's a trauma response. Soldiers use it to function in combat situations." He paused and something dark crossed his face. "You're saying the only reason we could fight these things is because we're good at psychological damage control. I'm saying your species has survived a harsh world and developed mental resilience that most of the galaxy lacks. The Celestial Dominion has lived in peace for so long that we've forgotten how to fight, how to adapt quickly, how to survive against impossible odds." "You haven't." The general stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. The other humans watched him, clearly recognizing some internal struggle. Finally, he turned back to Jakara. "The Dominion is the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, correct?" "One of them, yes. And you're telling me you can't stop these Whispers?" Jakara met his gaze steadily. "Not alone. We're scientists and philosophers, General. We've forgotten how to be warriors, but you haven't. And we need you." "You need us," the general repeated slowly. "Let me make sure I understand. You want humanity, a species you classify as primitive, a species that hasn't even made contact with the wider galaxy, to help you fight an existential threat that has destroyed every civilization that's encountered it." "Yes," General Marcus laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard." He stopped pacing and his expression hardened into something that reminded Jakara painfully of Captain Chen. "When do we start?" Over the following weeks, Jakara watched in amazement as humanity mobilized for war. The Dominion moved slowly, carefully, convening councils and committees to study the problem from every angle. Earth moved with the speed of a species that understood, deep in its genetic memory, that hesitation meant extinction. Shipyards that had been building exploration vessels were retooled for military production. Scientists who had been researching clean energy were redirected to weapons development. And the humans began to share something with Jakara that the Dominion had never possessed, a military doctrine built on centuries of warfare. The key to fighting the Whispers, General Marcus explained during one briefing, is accepting that you can't win on their terms. They exist partially outside our reality, which gives them advantages we can't match. So we don't try. We force them to fight on our terms. He pulled up tactical displays showing simulations of combat scenarios. Captain Chen's logs indicate the Whispers are vulnerable to conventional kinetic weapons and high-energy reactions. Basically, the stuff we've been using to kill each other for thousands of years. They're also susceptible to concentrated electromagnetic pulses, which disrupt whatever allows them to maintain cohesion across dimensions. Another officer, a young woman with sharp eyes, added, "We've also analyzed the mental attacks. The Whispers work by creating contradictory sensory input that overwhelms higher cognitive functions. But human brains compartmentalize. We can train your people to do the same. Mental exercises that allow them to function even while under psychic assault." Jakara absorbed all of this, feeling something shift in her understanding of the universe. The Celestial Dominion had achieved wonders through logic and reason, but there was something to be said for the brutal practicality of a species that had clawed its way up from the primordial mud. "There's one more thing," General Marcus said quietly. "We need to know everything you have on the Silence. Every fragment of data from that ancient Velkari expedition, every sensor reading, every myth and legend, because if we're going to stop this thing, we need to understand where it came from and what it wants." The research took months, a collaborative effort between human scientists and Dominion scholars. They discovered that the Whispers weren't native to their universe. They were intrusions from somewhere else, beings that had found a way to breach the barriers between realities. The Silence was a wound in space-time itself, a tear that had existed for millions of years, slowly leaking nightmares into the galaxy, and now that wound had been ripped wide open. "We have to close it," declared Dr. Elena Reeves, the chief science officer of the Joint Task Force. She stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, with the Silence marked as a spreading stain of red. "If we don't seal the breach, the Whispers will keep coming. Eventually they'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Closing a dimensional rift of that magnitude would require a level of energy we simply don't have," argued High Scholar Tormath of the Dominion Science Council. "The calculations suggest we would need the equivalent output of a supernova, focused and controlled to a degree that surpasses any known technology." Dr. Reeves smiled, that human smile that Jakara had come to recognize as a sign that something extremely dangerous was about to be proposed. "Then we make a supernova." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity, which meant it was perfectly human. They would take 12 of humanity's most powerful reactors, each capable of powering an entire city, and combine them with Dominion gravitational manipulation technology. The result would be a device capable of generating a controlled explosion with 1% the force of a supernova, more than enough, theoretically, to collapse the dimensional rift. The catch? Someone would have to deliver the device directly into the heart of the Silence, into the presence of the entity that spawned the Whispers, and detonate it manually. The energy involved would tear apart anything within a light-year radius. It would be a one-way trip. "I'll do it," Jakara said when the plan was presented to the Joint Command Council. General Marcus shook his head. "With respect, Commander, this is a human problem. We brought this thing down on the galaxy by exploring where we shouldn't have. We'll finish it. Captain Chen died saving my crew," Zakara replied firmly. "I won't let her sacrifice be meaningless. I'm going." In the end, they compromised. The mission would be crewed by volunteers from both species, humans who knew how to fight the Whispers, and Dominion personnel who understood the advanced technology required for the plan to work. Jakara would command the mission. General Marcus himself would serve as tactical advisor. The ship they built for the mission was called the Remembrance, a name chosen by human crew members in honor of the Prometheus. It was a hybrid vessel, combining human weapons systems with Dominion propulsion and shielding. It was ugly, utilitarian, and absolutely deadly. On the day of departure, Jakara stood on the observation deck, looking out at the fleet that had assembled to escort them to the Silence. 50 human warships and 30 Dominion vessels, an unprecedented alliance born from desperation and tempered by mutual respect. General Marcus joined her at the viewport. The old soldier had insisted on being part of the mission despite his age, and Jakara had agreed. If they were going to die, they might as well die together. "Do you think it'll work?" He asked quietly. I think we have to try, Jakara replied, because the alternative is watching the galaxy burn. You know, 6 months ago, humanity didn't even know you existed. Now we're preparing to sacrifice everything to save your civilization alongside ours. Marcus chuckled. Funny how things work out. General, why are you doing this? Your species could retreat to your home system, fortify it, survive even if the rest of the galaxy falls. Why risk everything for people you barely know? The general was quiet for a long moment, his aged eyes reflecting the stars beyond the viewport. Because Captain Chen was my daughter. Jakara's sensory stalks recoiled in shock. I didn't know. Neither did she at the end. We'd been estranged for years. I pushed her too hard, expected too much, and she joined the Exploration Corps just to get away from me. His voice cracked. But she still saved you. Still sacrificed herself for strangers. That's who she was, who she chose to be despite having me as a father. He turned to face Jakara directly. She believed in something bigger than herself, bigger than humanity. I'm doing this because I finally understand what that means. The journey to the silence took 2 weeks, and every day brought new encounters with the Whispers. The creatures had spread far from their origin point, consuming worlds and incorporating the victims into their biomass. Entire civilizations had fallen silent, their last transmissions speaking of voices in the dark, of promises whispered in dreams. But the joint fleet pushed forward, using the tactics developed from Captain Chen's logs and refined through dozens of smaller engagements. They learned to trust each other, human and alien fighting side by side, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths. Jakara watched as her crew, beings from a dozen different species, formed bonds with their human counterparts. She saw Torvus sharing battle stories with a human sergeant, their laughter echoing through the mess hall, despite the language barriers. She saw Dr. Reeves working alongside Dominion engineers, their different perspectives combining to solve problems neither could have managed alone. This, she thought, was what the galaxy should be. Not isolated civilizations pursuing their own advancement, but a community bound together by common purpose and mutual respect. It had taken an existential threat to achieve it, but perhaps that was the way of things. Perhaps unity always came at a terrible price. On the final day, they reached the edge of the silence. The entity was waiting for them. It was impossible to describe in any language that existed. It was vast beyond comprehension, its form shifting and changing, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Just looking at it through the senses caused neurological damage. Several crew members had to be sedated, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. But through that chaos, Jakara could perceive an intelligence, ancient, hungry, and utterly alien. The Whispers came in waves, millions of them, birthed from the entity's flesh and sent forth to overwhelm the fleet. The battle that followed made their first encounter look like a minor skirmish. Space itself seemed to tear apart under the assault, reality bending and warping as the creatures attacked. All ships execute Pattern Omega, General Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. By the remembrance time to reach the insertion point, the fleet moved with practiced precision, creating a corridor through the swarm. Dominion ships used their superior shielding to anchor the formation, while human vessels provided concentrated firepower. They fought like a single organism, each ship knowing its role, each crew trusting the others to do their part, and the remembrance dove into the heart of hell. Jakara piloted the ship personally, her training and instincts pushed to their absolute limit. The Whispers tore at their shields, their psychic attacks hammering against the crew's minds. She could hear the entity now, its voice like the death of stars, offering her anything she wanted, power, knowledge, eternal life. If she would only turn back, only abandon this futile resistance. Don't listen to it, Marcus shouted from the tactical station. Focus on the mission. Focus on... An explosion rocked the ship as a whisper breached the shields and smashed into the hull. Alarms screamed. Hull integrity was failing. They were still 300 kilometers from the insertion point. We're not going to make it, Dr. Reeves reported, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The device needs to be within 100 meters of the rift to ensure proper detonation sequence. Jakara made her decision in an instant. Evacuate the remembrance. All crew to the escape pods, now. Commander, the pods won't make it through the swarm, Torvus protested. We'll be torn apart before we— That's an order! Zakara roared, using every ounce of authority she possessed. General Marcus, get these people out of here. The old soldier met her eyes and understanding passed between them. He nodded slowly, then began ordering the evacuation. As the crew filed toward the escape pods, Marcus lingered at the doorway. It's been an honor, Commander. The honor was mine, General. Take care of them. Take care of all of them. Marcus left. The ship fell silent except for the groaning of stressed metal and the whisper of the entity trying to break into her mind. Zakara sealed the bridge, locked down all systems except propulsion and the detonation mechanism. Through the viewport, she could see it now. The rift itself, a tear in space-time that hurt to look at, that made her sensory stalks burn with agony. Beyond it, she caught glimpses of something else, the realm where these creatures originated. It was a place of impossible geometries and screaming colors, a place that defied every law of physics she had ever studied, and she was going to close it forever. The remembrance accelerated, pushing beyond its design limits. The hull began to glow red, then white, as friction and heat built to catastrophic levels. Zakara didn't care. She needed every ounce of speed to reach the rift before the ship disintegrated. 50 kilometers, 40, 30. The entity screamed, and reality itself trembled. Whispers swarmed the ship in such numbers that they blocked out the stars. The hull breached in a dozen places. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but it wasn't enough. She could feel the cold of space creeping into the bridge. 20 kilometers, 10. She armed the device, set it to detonate on her command, or on impact, or on hull breach. Whichever came first for Captain Chen, she whispered. For the Prometheus. For all of you who stood against the dark. 5.